There were a few people that I reached out to in the wake of October 7th that I knew were really passionate about inclusion, were really passionate about uncomfortable feelings and sitting with disagreements. And I said, would you like to talk to an American Israeli? And they said no.
Welcome to What Came After. I'm your host, Manya Marcus. On What Came After, we'll take a look at the many ways that people's lives changed on and after the brutal massacre in Israel on October 7th, 2023. We'll be speaking with people in Israel and around the world about how the devastating attack by Hamas has shifted, shaped, and changed them. To learn more about our podcast, please visit us at whatcameafter.com. I'm really, really excited to be sitting across the table here in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, with my guest, Sara Dahan. I have been wanting to interview you for several months, and I was thrilled when you said that you were ready.
I really am, and I'm so excited to have you here. This is a pleasure.
So I want to actually bring people right into the center of what we were just discussing. I'm going to, we've been having a long conversation, and I want to bring people into this. We've been talking about your identity, and really we've been talking about your identities. And so I'm wondering if you can introduce yourself, tell me all the things that you are, and share a little bit about where we just were in terms of what coming out has looked like for you in this past year.
Of course. So I'm many things. I'm a New Yorker, I'm a community builder, I'm a progressive, and I'm also a Jew and Israeli and a Zionist. And those are all identities that are so important to me. And in the beginning of the war, I felt like I had to hide some of those. My closest friends knew that I was Jewish, and my very inner circle knew that my family's Israeli, but these aren't really things that I've talked about in public before. And after October 7th, I found myself simultaneously really regretful that I hadn't talked about that because no one was checking in on me, but also really grateful because no one was attacking me. So it was a very weird middle ground to be in. And I'm not sure what would have happened if those identities were more public. Some of my Israeli friends were very outspoken and they got completely attacked and vilified. So I'm not sure what would have happened in an alternate reality, but I found myself definitely very scared of revealing these things about myself. And I still am. You've been very mindful and compassionate and warm about my nervousness doing this episode. And it came to a point where I just decided it was really important to me to start using my voice to talk about what it was like to be a progressive Zionist and the types of conflicts that I've had to heal in myself and in conversations with people in my community. It's an ongoing conversation, and I think it's really important to get it out there despite of and because of my fear.
So one thing that I want to emphasize is that you do community work. You do community building. You consult, right, on how to build community in all kinds of ways, which you can tell us about. But in order to do that work, and I think in order to be a progressive, you need to really understand identity and culture and all the ways in which those things mingle to create community. And so I think what's striking me is that these are categories you think about and you have thought about for a long time, identity and culture, but you weren't out. Maybe you were out as a Jew in the sense that you didn't mind if somebody knew it. You didn't lead with it, is what I'm understanding. And you didn't share that you were a Zionist or Israeli. Were you aware before October 7th that you were making that choice? Was it conscious?
I think it wasn't conscious, but it's also because I have a very rich Jewish life, but it's all sort of at home with my family. And there weren't a lot of opportunities for me to integrate that in my work. I didn't really work that much with Jewish communities. I was working with artists and entrepreneurs and tech people and finance people and spiritual people, wellness people, so many different industries, but it wasn't really centered on Judaism. So without really meaning to, I had this very compartmentalized life and nothing really felt in conflict with each other. Just I'm Jewish at home at the holidays with my family, and I am a community builder for my profession, and they don't really intersect. And I know that I'm not alone here. I'm one of those Jews that realized after October 7th how important that sense of integration of self is in your life. And so I've been completely immersed in Jewish communities now that I'm finding for the first time since the war. I wasn't really producing events or participating in events like that before, but it's become very important to me.
So here's where I want to introduce this detail that I initially was really drawn to. I don't know if you remember how we met.
You found a random Facebook comment I made, but I can't even remember what I said.
People say, wait, how did we meet?
It was so focused. Like you found something so specific, and it wasn't even when I made the comment. You found it like months later.
So I had bookmarked that comment. I think that the founder of Sword of Iron, which is a volunteer group, they organize volunteer efforts in Israel. I think the founder of it, someone I interviewed, Yocheved Rutenberg, had written that she wanted to hear how things were going outside of Israel. And you wrote this comment. I almost said piece, but it was extremely compelling about what it was like to be a progressive Jew, a progressive Zionist, a community builder after October 7th. And I think that what you were saying in that comment was that your community was shifting. That might be a generous, I think you were saying you felt that your community had left you.
I felt completely abandoned, not necessarily by individual people, but, a lot of my life after October 7th was online. I felt completely unsafe to be in public. My PTSD symptoms were really in full force. And, my communities, like my neighborhood was covered in graffiti. There were random demonstrations everywhere, which is really sad because they were these pro-Palestinian demonstrations. And I am pro-Palestinian. Whenever I would introduce myself to people around this topic in the last 10 or 15 years, I would always say I'm a pro-Palestinian, Zionist, Israeli Jew. But all of these different things combined with the threats of violence that happened both in my local communities and where I went to college. I went to MIT, and I was hearing all kinds of stuff on private channels about what was going on there. I just felt completely physically unsafe wherever I was. Most of my information gathering wasn't just from the news, it was from my feeds and what I was seeing on social media. So, all of this is a long way of saying that whenever someone posted propaganda that I knew wasn't true, I would see everyone I knew rally around that post and like it and heart it. And I wish that there was a way to go into more of the nuances of their beliefs and to understand, what they were agreeing with, what they weren't, and kind of how they felt about everyone. How did they feel about Palestinians, Israelis, Jews, non Jews? But there's no room for nuance in situations like that. And so it was just a very automatic response for me to assume that these people weren't safe. People were actually getting hurt. So because of that very global, sort of prolific support for the pro-Palestinian side, even though I also want liberation for Palestinians, I did feel abandoned. I felt abandoned for sure by my progressive community that I had spent the last 10 years building up in New York.
I think that having only recently met you, but understanding how valuable conversation really is to you, it sounds like one of the major losses of October 7th was that conversation really no longer felt accessible. People weren't talking. They were yelling. They were screaming.
Weren't talking. And they also were not listening. There were a few people that I reached out to in the wake of October 7th that I knew were really passionate about inclusion, were really passionate about uncomfortable feelings and sitting with disagreements. And I said, would you like to talk to an American Israeli? And they said no. And these are the same people that were, about inclusion. And to be fair to them, I don't really know why they said no. It might not have been because of these biases. It could have just been a normal reason people get, we're New Yorkers, we're very busy. So because of that, I give them the benefit of the doubt.
Well, that's very generous of
Yeah.
you. I'm not sure that I would have come to that same conclusion. But listen, when I hear you say that you're pro-Palestinian, progressive, Jewish, Zionist, Israeli, to me, that sounds like it all hangs together. But what the term pro-Palestinian has become kind of feels to me like pro-life. I think we are all pro-life.
Yeah.
Right?
And we're also pro-autonomy.
Right. So it feels like the language got co-opted. And again, you love and live in dialogue. I can tell that. And so for language to then evade you, like, oh, I can't be pro-Palestinian anymore because I have to choose a side.
Yeah.
It sounds like that was scary.
Not only did I feel abandoned by my community, but I felt completely estranged from myself. I felt myself go into these very tribal ways of thinking of like, wow, they're really against us. They really hate us. I can't trust anyone. I need to be fully devoted to my Israeli heritage and completely just separate myself from all of these diverse communities that I was part of. So it wasn't just these external losses, it was also this huge internal shift. And I really missed my open mindedness, my love for nuance, for dialogue, like you're saying. And thankfully, I found my way back, but I don't think I would have had to go to such an extreme place if there was room for more conversation.
So this is where I want to do the big reveal. When I found your comment, it was before you had made this major life transition. And when I reached out to you, you said, oh, there's some follow-up on this story. I now live in Israel.
I sure do.
I said, wait a minute. Like, I thought, well, when I'm in Israel, we're going to talk. And it felt too raw, I think,
Yeah.
at that point for you.
It was a little raw. I think that I was also on my way to feeling a little bit more grounded and centered and open-minded and stuff, but I wasn't quite there. And now it's a beautiful feeling to appreciate the decisions I made in the last year. The fact that I live in Israel, that I live in the same town that my ancestors are from. It's the town that my great-grandmother was born in. And I can appreciate all those things from a place of feeling connected with myself again. And it's not coming from this tribal, fearful place anymore. It's just everything worked out. So,
well, you said something really powerful to me before we started, which is that you had to go to a war zone to feel safe.
Yeah.
You are not the only person who feels like that. I think lots of us have.
I tell a lot of people that they think it's so just crazy. They really can't believe it. And I say, talk to a bunch of Jews. I promise you, we're all talking about making Aliyah.
Yeah, talk to some of us.
Yeah.
I was at a lecture recently by, I don't know if you know Yossi Klein Halevi, but he said something fascinating. He said, from a kind of bodily harm perspective, maybe Jews are disadvantaged in Israel. But from the vantage point of psychological safety, there is no better place.
Yeah.
I would love if you would tell us why you chose to move to Israel, where you live, and about your family's incredible legacy there.
Thank you. I would love to talk about that. So my family has a very rich, deep history in Israel or Palestine, depending on which time period you're talking about. There's one branch of my family that we don't really have an exact date because records weren't kept during these times, but that probably predates the Ottoman Empire, so even before the early 1500s. And then there are other branches of my family where we can date it. We know that one was the early 1800s, one was a little bit before that. I only know of one relative that came as recently as the very early 1900s. Various parts of my family have been really central to the creation of Israel, either the creation of industries there or one of my great grandmother's parents were one of the 66 founding families of Tel Aviv.
Yichus.
Yeah.
That's a Yiddish word, right?
I actually don't know Yiddish because I'm Sephardic, so you have to
Yichus
translate
is
that for
like,
me.
it means noble lineage, you got, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's something that I'm really proud of. I love that I have that rich history there. And right now I live in Yaffo or Jaffa, which is where my great grandmother was born, and her first language was Arabic. I live in a mixed Jewish Arab neighborhood, and I feel completely safe there. And Yaffo is actually like an excellent example for what coexistence could look like. It's not completely sunshine and rainbows there all the time, but people do know how to coexist. There's this precedent of respect and cultural sensitivity and cooperation. Like, there are all of these reasons why there weren't any riots in Yaffo in this war. Like, the police and the mosque leaders and all of these different people saw the danger of it, and they said, here's how we're going to put a stop to it. So there are a lot of amazing things happening in Yaffo. And
And I just want to
yeah,
interject for a
yeah.
second and say that when we do the show notes, I'll link to an article in the Times of Israel that my friend Svi Smith wrote about why Yaffo was particularly well prepared.
I'm actually referencing that article.
It's
we
a
read the same
fantastic
article.
A lot of groundwork was laid. And I was so pleased to have understood that, because right now sometimes it feels like planning for peace and coexistence is a fantasy and it
Mhm.
could never work, but it did. It did
Yeah.
in the place where you're living.
It's a fantasy until you're living it. And I think that when you have the opportunity to really embody things like that, it takes a whole different shape. You can actually start to see how it's possible. And that is, back to your question, the biggest reason that I moved to Israel. I saw what was happening, like the conflict and the unrest, both in my American progressive communities and in Israel. Like, there's unprecedented levels of PTSD there and mistrust in Palestinians and political divides amongst Israelis. It's honestly such a complicated time, potentially the most complicated since Israel's founding. And I realized that I just want to be part of rebuilding. I've spent my life as a connector, a community builder. In my own spiritual personal development, I've spent many years learning how to hold conflicting truths and ambiguity and uncomfortable feelings. I really want to bridge all of that together and just learn how to sit with all of these things, how to humanize enemies. And so there are all of these goals that I have. I wouldn't even say like professionally. I think it speaks more to life's purpose that I really see coming into fruition in the future in Israel. But, I have to be honest, it's also guided in part by the fact that I do feel so abandoned by my communities. And there was a time where I felt truly threatened. That time is thankfully coming to an end. I don't really feel unsafe here anymore. But, it was really scary when that happened so quickly. And it was this realization for many of the Jews that I know. We were all kind of, talking to each other behind closed doors and saying, like, did you know that people could turn on us this quickly? And there's so much like room for debate about that. Some people were like, yes, I knew the whole time. Some people were like, this is shocking me to my core. And who knows how like predictable this really was. But I'd like to think, even if it's just a story I'm telling myself, that my move to Israel is more motivated by these more hopeful ideas instead of just fear. And I'm really grateful for being able to cultivate safety over there while I kind of regroup.
I think that's really the gist, is that you can cultivate safety there to get back to yourself.
Hmm.
And has it been easier for you to do that there versus here?
I'd say so. I mean, it's an interesting question because Israeli culture. It's
I do.
really loud and chaotic and extreme and hot. It's so hot there. I think it's hard to think with nuance when you're melting on a sidewalk.
That's a really good point. Summer is not a time for nuance in Israel.
Yeah. So, it's in some ways more challenging there to think with nuance, but at the same time, like, I'm more rooted to my heritage and my lineage there. I feel definitely a spiritual pull. I feel more centered in myself. And I feel that sense of integration. I feel like all parts of myself can really be seen and embraced there. And it's a beautiful thing. I think that it's something that all olim, which is the Hebrew word for immigrants, all olim sort of have to hold on to that. They have to have that sort of bigger feeling that keeps them tethered to Israel because it is really chaotic.
You have to be pretty passionate to
Yeah.
choose it, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about this seismic shift for you after October 7th. Can we go back to October 7th itself? Do you remember where you were and how you learned and what you were feeling?
I do. It actually took me a little bit of time to hear the news because every first or second weekend of October, I go on a hiking trip, like a solo hiking trip. So I went to sleep really early the night before, woke up at 6 a.m., didn't even look at my phone, went and hiked up a mountain in New Hampshire by myself. It was like the trickiest solo climb I had ever done. And at the very top of the mountain, I have no idea why, somehow a WhatsApp message was able to get through. And it was my sister saying, "Did we hear from all of the relatives yet, if they're safe?" I had no idea what that meant. And I didn't really have much reception up there, but it was enough, or maybe it was from the WhatsApp messages to figure out that Israel had been invaded and people had died, but we didn't know how many yet. The first thought I had was, I have to get down this mountain safely because if I die, my family will never forgive me for adding more grief to this day. And I don't think I even grasped the gravity of what had happened. I think it actually took a few days for me to even understand. Like, I saw the videos that Hamas took. I was consuming all of this information at a rapid pace, but it took a long time for it to set in. And my family's WhatsApp is normally very active. Like, we send each other photos, what we're doing that day, updates, articles that we read. It's a very active family chat. And it took about 2 weeks for even one person just to say, "Is everyone okay today? Did you guys eat food? Are you taking care of yourselves?" We were in complete freeze mode. This is a very warm, supportive Jewish family, and we just were so shell-shocked. We couldn't even talk to each other. And it took months for me to even be able to reach out to other Jews that I knew and say, "Are you okay?" Because I know all of my different friends that have family members in Israel or that were born in Israel themselves. And I couldn't even reach out to them and say, like, "Is your family okay? How are you doing?" I think that people really underestimate how shocked and frozen we were because of what happened on October 7th and also this really immediate reaction.
So I've been really fortunate to be able to tour your home, one of your homes. You're, I guess, secondary now because we're
Yeah.
in New York and you don't live here, but you do have space here. And you showed me your office. And on the wall of your office, you can tell me how many Hamzas.
Dozens. I don't know exactly how many, but dozens.
I would love it if you could tell us about that wall. And the reason that I'm asking the question now is to find out whether any of those were purchased or hung during this period of shell shock or freeze.
Yeah. So I do have a wall of these ceramic, metal, handmade hamsas. And for the listeners that don't know, a hamsa is like a hand. Some people call it a hand of Fatima, depending on which religion you're referencing. And it's a symbol of good luck and fortune. And it was really important to me to feel as connected as I could to my Jewish heritage and to feel like I was doing something, even if it was really small. So I decided to support Israeli artists who were one of the many, many populations that was suffering during the war because of limited tourism.
And also just global backlash.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not interested in your art anymore
Yeah, a
because
lot
you're
of
Israeli. There's a
boycotting.
lot of that.
For sure. And so I ended up buying a hamsa every time I felt particularly alone or sad, devastated, angry, anything. It was just kind of a nice outlet for me. And you can tell from the rest of my home that I really care about surrounding myself with kind of positive, story-filled, calming artifacts and
But also bright and bold.
Mhm,
I mean, I think
mhm.
I think it's all of that.
I think that your environment can definitely influence the way that you see the world and the way that you see yourself. And my apartment is definitely an extension of sort of like the canvas of who I am. And it's my artistic outlet. So the Wall of Hamsas doesn't just symbolize my journey through the war, it symbolizes my journey going forward and what my Jewish identity means to me. And yes, I definitely purchased the vast majority of those Hamsas during specifically this time between like December and April, where I was just so confused and angry and completely stricken with tragedy and really grappling with all of these feelings that were just so new to me. I wasn't used to feeling scared of people. I wasn't used to feeling betrayed by that many people in my life at the same time. And I didn't really know what my life was going to look like. It was before I had made the decision to move to Israel.
And at the bottom of that wall
Yes.
is a beautiful piece, which is a map of Israel. And it says, Ein li
Ein li
eretz
eretz acheret. I have no other land. And in most ways, that is true. Like my heart is in Israel. But now I'm sort of coming around and saying, you know what? I am an American. I'm proud to be American. This is a very recent thing. Only last month did I start.
Breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news. It's okay that I'm American. It really didn't feel like that for most of the war. I just kind of was like, well, I'm Israeli now. This is horrible. I had a very pessimistic view. And I think that's what was, so hard is I'm not a pessimistic person. And now I think there's room for more countries in my heart.
But I do see that piece on your wall.
And it's my favorite one.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it feels like a moment or some kind of representation of the fact that you organized yourself to move across the world.
I think I actually bought that one 2 weeks before I decided I was moving to Israel.
I had a feeling. So can you unpack how you got the mental clarity and also how you, for those of us who might be interested in Aliyah, how did you get through all the logistics?
I have some bad news for you. I haven't. I have an extremely complicated Aliyah case. I've been working on it for almost this entire year. Like it's really been a little bit of a mess logistically. That's why I really mean what I said before, that you have to have that bigger vision. You have to understand why you're there, because whether it happens in the initial immigration paperwork or once you're there and you're trying to like go to the post office or, there's so many things in Israeli culture that are just notorious for being completely unbearable. And I am getting initiated early on. I view this very much as my integration in Israeli culture to have such a hard time with all of the logistics. And I think that's great. It's giving me all of these tools that I need to really advocate for myself, in the coming years and decades. So,
you know what, you're right. I am noticing that you're very sort of soft-spoken and you have this very calm and gentle demeanor. And now I'm thinking about that.
Well,
in
what's
Israel.
funny? I've lived in Israel twice. They were only for 3 to 4 months each. The second time I was volunteering on Magen David Adom ambulances. I was a little bit older than the other volunteers, so they put me in South Tel Aviv. So I've seen some things. And that was a very interesting time. But, I was the same then that I am now. I was very soft-spoken, very gentle, very quiet. And one of the medics said, Sarah, you have to speak up. You're offending me. Your presence and your personality is offending me. You have to change. And I just said
That's unbelievable. Well, I love that.
I mean, he was kind
funny.
of saying it as a joke, but, he was also screaming at me. So there you go, Israelis. But
right. It's all in there. Yes.
It was like out of love and also screaming at me. And I just said very sweetly, like, you know what? I think I'm going to stay this way and you can deal with that. That's my version of toughness and I'm not going to change. And people said the same thing to me 10 years ago when I moved to New York. They said, New York is going to change you. And I was like, what? Maybe I'll just stay soft and sweet. So I'm not worried about that in Israel, but you do have to, be really firm in asking for what you want, and you can't take no for an answer. But my encouragement to people who are considering Aliyah is that I have a very uniquely weird case. It relates to my Israeli parent being deceased. And there's this whole issue when that happens. And most people are not in that situation. Either you don't have an Israeli parent and then it's super easy. Don't worry, it's easy for you guys. Or you do have an Israeli parent who registered you, or if they didn't register you with the government, they can come with you to the embassy. There are all these ways to deal with it. I'm in a very special situation.
But it sounds like your intention is to stay.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I'm happy to invest whatever time or energy or frustration it takes, because this is definitely the long-term journey that I'm on.
Super curious about this Magen David Adom experience. And I had no idea that you had any kind of experience along those lines.
Yeah.
Tell us what that is. Some people don't know, and what your time was like.
So right after I graduated college, I volunteered with Magen David Adom, which is Israel's national ambulance service. There are a couple of other ambulance services that are smaller and for more niche communities, but Magen David Adom is, who would answer the dispatch when you call. I think it's 101 is the ambulance line.
And they're always busy.
Yeah, they're always busy. Israel has a lot of need for ambulances. And so I was volunteering there after college because at the time I wanted to be a doctor. I actually had my heart set on attending the Medical School for International Health in Beersheba. I was going to go there when I was very set on the doctor path. And after Magen David Adom, I ended up getting a degree in public health instead. I was able to see a lot of health inequities, and this whole idea of equity and access was very important to me. This was about in 2014. And so in these experiences in southern Tel Aviv, there were a lot of refugees, like African refugees, drug addicts, impoverished people. And we were the front lines. Like I really learned that people who work in ambulances see an entire population of people that you would never otherwise see. There are people that stay in their home all day, every day, like hoarders or the super elderly that can't really go out on their own. So it was like really humbling and beautiful. I saw someone get brought back to life. I saw someone die. These are the most sensitive, extreme moments of someone's life. And to be present with that it was just so humbling and intimate. There were also like these little moments that just really shocked me. Like I was taking blood pressure for a man in the ambulance, and when I rolled up his sleeve, I saw the Holocaust tattoo.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Really powerful. It was a lot. It was a lot, but I would definitely repeat it. And, they have the foreign volunteer program that's still going. And I highly recommend that to anyone who either wants to be in medicine or just wants sort of extreme time. Yeah, the first time I lived in Israel, I was doing research in a university, which was great. But it was living in Tel Aviv the second time with Magen David Adom that I knew I would live in Israel again. So this whole plan of making Aliyah, it's not like this is the first time that seed was planted, but I definitely wasn't planning on living there in this stage of my life. The war is the reason that I accelerated everything. I had no idea when I was going to live in Israel again. It was kind of this floating desire, which is unlike me. I'm a planner. And so I think that there was this tension of like, well, I know I want to do this, but will it ever happen if I'm not planning it?
Sarah, you're kind of ageless. Do you mind sharing your age?
I'm in my mid-30s.
Okay.
People guess a lot that I'm in my early 20s, but
I
look at the gray hair. I earned those.
Okay, so you're in your mid-30s, and it wasn't at this point that you imagined that you would move back.
No, I thought that I was going to stay in New York and help raise my niece. She's very important to me. And I have a bunch of friends with kids here that I'm kind of like an honorary aunt to. And obviously, my whole family, like my cousins, are basically my sisters. It's a really close family. And that's the only thing that was holding me back, like this tension of like, do I stay or do I go? And the way that I'm thinking about it is that every single Ola or Ola immigrant in Israel feels like they left something behind. If you don't feel like there's kind of this pull back to your home country. It's not supposed to be easy. You're supposed to feel that sacrifice. And that's kind of what helps keep the dream alive. You know why you're doing it, you know what the higher call is. And I'm very, very lucky to have a lot of support from my family. When I came out to them as an Ola, someone who's making Aliyah, they screamed and clapped. And every time I see them, they're like, oh my God, you did it.
I was holding my breath. Okay.
Yeah.
So they've been supportive.
So supportive.
Now, this is really interesting because we've now used the term coming out twice. Once to reference the fact that you became open about being Israeli and a Zionist. Once to reference the fact that you informed your family you were moving across the world. So let's go back to the fact that your family was ecstatic that you were leaving.
Way to make me feel missed. Thanks, guys. I got some very interesting comments, not just from my family, but from some of my really close friends, where they would say stuff like, if only we could do it. And I would just say, why don't you? Like, join me. We can all be together in Israel. And it was really interesting. I guess I don't have quite as many tethers to America. I'm single. I don't have these responsibilities. All these people have tons of kids. They have like a whole litter of kids. And, they have their life here. They have their routine. And what I'm doing is, to be honest, I don't really think it's that brave. I keep getting that word. I don't know if I agree with that, but it's definitely bold. And it's a lot of change, like a lot of change. I still get culture shock, even though I've lived in Israel twice. I'm Israeli. I was brought up with this culture. And every day, there's still something where I'm like, oh my God, I live in the Middle East.
When did you actually move? How long have you been there
I've been splitting this year with Israel and New York. I think it still feels ambiguous because my immigration paperwork hasn't gone through. So I basically sneak around on a tourist visa. Please do not hold that against me in some kind of immigration hearing.
I think the immigration hearing should focus on how much effort and sacrifice you're putting into being there, and they should just pass you with flying colors.
That's what a lot of people say. Like, if someone really wants to live here that badly, why don't you just give them the paper? But it's okay. They're really making me work for it the Israeli way. No hard feelings.
So I think one of the reasons that you were now interested in having this conversation is the election.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to share that I saw my husband, who almost never posts on Facebook, post a rusty safety pin yesterday.
Okay.
And he said to me, it's Giving Tuesday. Yesterday was Giving Tuesday. And he said, I'm being solicited by organizations that we've donated to in the past, all of which I feel have betrayed us.
Mm-hmm.
And he was referencing after Trump won the first time, when people wear a safety pin to identify themselves as a safe person to everybody, right? It was like a indication of inclusivity. And he posted one that was rusty.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
This election has been something. I'm not going to insinuate anything. I know people who feel all kinds of ways about it. So why don't I just give you the floor and you can tell me how it landed for you?
It was definitely a complicated election for me. And I'll come out a third time on this podcast. This is the very first federal election that I've ever not voted in. I have the privilege of coming from a non-swing state, so that decision didn't really carry that much weight or guilt, but I consider voting to be a really important civic duty. And, I vote in every election, like the local elections. I read about every single candidate. Like, I care about this stuff. And I probably spent hundreds of hours researching this election. I listened to so many interviews from so many perspectives all over the spectrum. I wanted to hear everyone's point of view. And I just could not live with myself voting for a candidate that normally I would support who did not make me feel safe or confident in the future of the Jewish people in America. And I know there are so many mixed opinions about that. And I really did I spent like maybe a third of those hundreds of hours just listening to like, why is Kamala good for Jews and Israelis? I wanted to believe. And it was just really hard, just like seeing everything that I was seeing behind the scenes at MIT and my own communities. So, it was It was a very complicated election for me. But, I think that what gets even more complicated is what comes after the election. And this idea of facing division and betrayal and abandonment, not just the things that I felt towards my communities about me being Jewish and Israeli, but now they're feeling it from 51% of the country, this feeling of mistrust and betrayal. So I feel like where I see myself now, it's not really about these alignments that I have of like, I like this candidate or I like this party. I see myself as part of the movement to rebuild and to start dialogue and to help people see nuance and humanity in different situations. And either America will be a model for that for peace in the Middle East, or the Middle East will model that for America. So, one example that I'll give about that is that my family has been in Israel for a really long time, and they've survived all kinds of anti Semitism and pogroms and everything you can imagine before the War of Independence. In 1939, my grandfather was 14 years old, and he was living with his family in Tiberias, which is in northern Israel. And there was this mob of really angry Arabs that were going from village to village and saying, "Where are the Jews? Where do the Jews live?" Someone pointed to my grandfather's house, and my grandfather and his four other siblings and his parents all hid in a single closet. They were like really preparing themselves for the fate that met a lot of people on October 7th. And what happened was the mob knocked on the window of the house, and the person that answered was an Arab policeman that was renting a room from my great-grandparents. And they said, "Where are the Jews? We were told that Jews live here." And he said, "You have the wrong house." My grandfather's family was the only family to survive in his neighborhood. So when we think about things like division and tribes and like all of these things that can be really fear-mongering and make us go into these black or white mindsets, I just remember that story and I think about how there are people who want violence and there are people who want peace. And I don't think it always comes from the places that you expect, but the more that we can feed those stories and that narrative, the more that we'll eventually be able to coexist, whether that's Israelis and Palestinians, or progressives and conservatives, or Jews wherever they are in the world. Yeah, that's really what I'm about these days.
I want to thank you so much for
Thank you,
taking this
Manya.
ride with me. I know it wasn't easy, and I just really value the ability to be here with you and to hear all these stories.
The things that are the most important are never easy.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to What Came After wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us online at whatcameafter.com.
ולמרות שחשבת שעשית חלק מהדרך, שוב הדרך מתארכת והשביל מסתלסל ומתפתל. ולמרות שחשבת שהצלחת, אז כדאי שתחשבי שוב. כן, אולי זה לא ישוב, אז תלמדי להעריך מה שחשוב. כל החיים רציתי להוכיח לעולם שאני הילדה היחפה בשכונה, אני עוד אראה לכולם. אין ממתקים בארון והולכים ברגל, מאחרים שוב לבית ספר, זה רגיל פה בנוף בקריה. כיסים, כי חלומות זה בכסף, זכיתי